1992, we have a former operations engineer in Region 1 who created a plan for every section of every road. So we've been doing this a long time. So this topic is going to give you a feel of where we are today and where we're going in the future. And that's one of the things the three panelists are going to talk about. We feel very important that we're stewards, temporary stewards of $35 billion of assets. That's the value of the assets that the Department of Transportation manages here in Utah. It's our responsibility for this brief period of time, to manage those assets appropriately for future generations. So to start off, I'd like to introduce the three speakers. Corey Pope, most of you know Corey, Director of Planning, Programming. Corey's a graduate from the University of Utah. Our next speaker after that will be, I think I'm doing this in order. No? Nathan is first? I'm the moderator. I know what I'm doing, right? So Nathan Lee. Nathan's a graduate from the Utah State University. Been with the department since the early 2000s. Region 2 and Region 4 Director. And then Rick Torgerson, Region 4 Director. Rick is a graduate from the University of Utah. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to the panelists.
Thanks, Dan. Welcome, everybody. Couple of things y'all heard yesterday, that we bleed orange, and there's no better way to bleed orange than to just have it on the outside. That way, if it gets intermixed with real blood, it still looks orange. So look for an opportunity. I'm hoping to see you all with an orange tie here soon, scarf, whatever you need. You try and find it. The other thing is, I noticed yesterday that all kinds of people were tweeting stuff on their accounts. So I made a list of Twitter quotes. I don't want you to write down just whatever you think you heard. I'm going to tell you specifically 144 characters or less what to put in there, and because we want it to sound good. No, appreciate the chance to be here and talk to you about our strategic goals and preserving our infrastructure. I got thinking that some of you may wonder what we've been up to as directors. What are we doing in the boardroom in the back corner? And well, you came to the right session, because Corey's going to tell you. He has nothing to lose at this point. Okay, beyond that, just over 2 years ago, we headed on a new era of UDOT. We created a vision and a mission about keeping Utah moving. Now, these statements, they were embodied in a tradition we've had about strategic goals at UDOT for a long, long time. But this new era that we've headed on, we've started to develop a framework that's going to define what success looks like for the strategic goals that we have. Maybe different than defining where we've been or what we've accomplished. We're now working to define what that success might look like. And we're going to look today a little bit at preserving infrastructure and how that's changing. When you look up on the screen here, you might notice that preserving infrastructure, success is definitely defined way beyond just maintaining our asset. We're looking for the lowest life cycle cost of those assets. That's what we want preserving infrastructure to do. Not just account that we have it and that we're maintaining it, but developing strategies that'll allow us to implement better choices in the future and make our dollars go further. Now, two of the items that are up here, as we call the outcomes that we're responsible for, you've seen before. They've been on the list for a long time, that of pavement and bridge and the conditions that they're in. A third one, a new one that's up there, is the ATMS and signal conditions. And this ATMS and signal conditions, maybe a way for you to think about this is they introduce the concept that technology is part of our infrastructure, and it needs to be part of our infrastructure. And much like all of you probably have one of these in your pocket today, and you don't know how to do a lot of the things you do without it, technology has a lot to do with our infrastructure and how it performs, and we can't operate without that in the future. So we use this technology to try to extend the life of things, to try and help us achieve more than we've done before. And as Stan alluded to, we've had generations of how we do that and different things that are there. And today we refer to that as asset management. So let me talk to you a little bit about this chart that you're looking at here. Up in the top left on the asset management, you see a pavement condition curve. Anybody seen that before? Pretty common. We all recognize that good roads cost less. The idea that if you invest small incremental improvements in a system over a period of time, that it'll last much longer for this over replacing it on a regular investment cycle without maintenance. Down below, this chart might be familiar to you and it might look a little different. What the chart down below represents are bridges. Those are all the bridges that we have in the state. And as you look at that list of bridges, you'll recognize they're set up by the decades, each decade that's there. Now, our management system that started with a plan for every section said that a bridge has a 50-year design life, and at the end of 50 years, you need to plan on replacing it. By taking that management system into account, we have 27% of our bridge infrastructure that needs replaced at this point in time. And it's continuing to grow. As you can see, those 70s and 80s bridges, there's a lot of bridges that were built during that time, so that number's going to grow. As that number grows, you need funding to replace those. They're getting more expensive. We've got to have different management strategies to address that. That's what we're looking at trying to accomplish with asset management. So one of the things that we're moving forward in, and some of you have been involved in there, is we're trying to define performance metrics for how things perform. And if we can define performance metrics, we can make different decisions about funding. An example of that would be in this picture you see over on the left, in a blue box, of all of those roads that are up, or those bridges that are up there, 88% of them are in good condition, 11 in fair, and 1 in poor. So just in a simplistic way, you could take, just by looking at the condition of the bridge, from the data we're able to collect from the good asset and inspection methods we have today, and recognize that we may only need to replace 1 to 12% of our bridges rather than more like 27%, thus extending the life of our system well beyond where we are. The goal for us as we define metrics is going to be able to propel that effort forward using a lot of the tools and technologies you're going to hear about from Rick and Corey today to make that happen in everyday advances. So asset management has helped us extend life and performance metrics, and now what we want to do then is trend time. So what does this mean to trend time? Well, as we're working on those assets, I got a picture here for you, and this picture shows level 2 surface areas, and then it shows level 1 interstate surface areas on the right. The most important thing about this picture for you to see is a new performance metric to decide how we spend the money. If we introduce the variability of risk into what we do and determine that certain risks are eligible for us to take and to use in our system, and we balance that against the funding that's available, we can make a lot of choices we didn't make in the past when we tried to protect for every risk. And in so doing, we can actually improve our infrastructure in a short period of time. So, for example, we're going to talk a little bit about this, and those who heard Carlos' speech yesterday, he said there's about $55 million that came in the gas tax increase. You can see in the example on the left, it shows a $50 million increase in our system and what it would do to the roadway system of level 2 roads if we put that influx in there. By taking these different management approaches and defining those in there, we did something unique over this past year, and we're continuing to grow this with a tool called Decision Lens that Rick will talk to you about. But we identified that we only need to maintain a certain amount of surface areas in our system in order to maintain a certain condition looking forward. And that if we manage the asset better, we can choose to do other things with the money. We can be more flexible with the money and accomplish new things. We also found that by doing this, it gave opportunity for innovation. Because if you hand to all of you the opportunity to decide how you're going to spend the money on that road to get us that opportunity to trend time and extend the life, you'll make choices that you think will be best for the system given today's current standards and tools and opportunities. The oldest example of this would be something like performance graded asphalts. prior to using those, we had a lot of rutting problems. We introduced those and rutting almost entirely left our system. So finding those tools and those unique innovations that are available can extend life in things in ways we never saw before. And that's what everybody as individuals can bring into the system. And we define that as those measures you're going to use to reduce that life cycle cost for the physical asset. And it gives you an opportunity when you do those types of things to manage the asset better and have flexibility with that money. And that allows you to get to other assets that if we had to just hunker down and just focus on a pavement or focus on a bridge, we might not fix a culvert, or we might not build a bike lane, or some of those other things that are there. So as we tried to wrap this all up and put it in a concise effort, what are we doing as leaders? We're encouraging you to help us develop a simple and concise product that shows our assets' performance and how they trend over time. And I think success can best be defined by building strategies that are going to allow the future generation, our kids, to have an investment that's actually, efficient and self-sustaining, not something that's unreliable and degrading. And how are we going to do that? I'm going to let Corey and Rick explain a little bit about how some of those things can happen.
Thanks, Nate. Nice introduction, too. Good morning. So between you and lunch, we're going to be very efficient. And to do that, I'm going to deviate just a little bit from this pure discussion on preservation. Nate got into some of the details that I'm not smart enough to understand. Rick's going to do the same. So I'm going to talk about something that I do understand. And I'm going to change it just a little bit. It's about credibility. And you're wondering what that has to do with this slide up here. So am I a little bit. But as I start talking about, credibility, we heard Carlos yesterday, those of you that got to hear him talk, spent a little time on that. But credibility is the lifeblood of our organization, the lifeblood of most organizations. If you're not credible, you don't last very long. The reason I want to talk about that and to talk about the importance is because I believe that our preservation program, that our asset management program has done as much as anything in this department to provide credibility. I've had the privilege over the last 12, 15 years to witness some incredible presentations by our senior leaders. And they were to the public, they were to elected officials, the legislature, and they were using graphs like this. And they were taking data from our asset management system, from our preservation program. They were turning it into information, like the graphs here, that they could communicate needs, communicate conditions, communicate kind of the status of where we're at. And they were able to do that year after year, day after day, consistently. And because we have these programs of preservation and asset management in place, that information was, like I said, they were able to go back every year and provide the same type of information, the same credible information, and it developed incredible trust. And that's really what, in my mind, one of the most valuable aspects of asset management and of having a sound preservation program is being able to develop that credibility and trust. And yeah, it allows us to manage our projects. It allows us to figure out what pavements and what bridges to work on first and what kind of treatments. And that's all very important. But the most important thing that I think comes out of it is at that high level that allows us to talk about things like level 2 roads and where we're headed with level 2 roads with the current funding. And when we're asked that question about what would it take to treat level 2 roads, our low volume roads, the same as everything else, be proactive about it, we can start to answer those questions too with that graph on the right. And pretty soon you start presenting this information, you start communicating in this manner, and pretty soon you have a lot of followers. And I think, again, it's because of the credibility, because of the trust that's been developed from these programs and the ability to present good information consistently. Another thing is, we've done a really good job with these programs, I think, of setting realistic expectations. Some of you may have seen this. It's kind of a popular map that gets shown, but basically what it is a few years ago, we knew that we needed to provide a dedicated source of money for preserving our pavements and bridges. And the department made a decision at that time to dedicate the majority of all of our federal funds to doing that. Stan mentioned good roads cost less. That was something that's been drummed into our heads since day one. I think that was the first thing on the quiz that they gave me after my employee orientation. Good roads cost less. That's a philosophy we've always followed. So we made that dedication of federal funds and said, this is going to be our program that we use to keep things in good shape and to take care of things and make sure we're treating good roads the best we can and keeping them good. Well, we quickly realized that even with that dedicated source, with that commitment, we didn't have enough money to take care of everything. So we categorized our roads. We turned them into 3 categories of interstates, kind of our high volume or level 1 roads, and then our low volume or level 2 roads. And that was a painful thing to do because what it meant is we were basically kind of discriminating against those low volume roads. So some of you may have heard John Nord say years ago that it was one of the most painful things he ever did because his roads were like his children. And it meant that he had to treat some of his children differently, couldn't treat them as well as some of the others. Well, that's what this map designated. And it shows that, we have interstates that are our highest priorities. It shows we have our higher volume roads that are not interstates that are our next priority. And then we have our level 2 roads. And the message that we put out there year after year is that, we're doing a good job here, but we can't take care of everything. And here's the result, and here's the analysis that's gone behind it. We made really, really, I believe, very smart decisions and kind of a risk analysis, if you will, in developing this. But this was the message that we were able to communicate. We can't do everything. And so this is what we're going to be able to do. And back to that previous graphic where it showed the 2 condition levels of level 2 roads, because of this communication, we were being asked a lot, well, what would it take? What do you need to treat everything proactively? To really live your good roads cost less throughout the entire system. And, again, our senior leadership, and I'll never forget some of the opportunities I've had to see them speak to our decision makers up at the legislature. And they would talk about just kind of what I've done now, and they would go through that, and they never once said we need more money, never once asked for more money. It was all about, this is the money we have. Here's the information that we've generated from our preservation and our asset management programs. If we get the same amount, we're going to use these same programs. We're going to use this same model. We're going to do it the same way. If we get less money, we're going to do it the same way. If we get more money, we're going to use these same programs and models. We're going to do it the same way. And about halfway through those presentations, it was sort of amazing because I would see legislators kind of leaning into each other and saying, we have this surplus money. How do we get that to UDOT? These guys really have it together. So back to that point of credibility is, I think a lot of the information that has come out of our preservation program, out of our asset management program, has helped develop a lot of credibility for UDOT. I don't know of another public organization in the nation that is more trusted or has more credibility. And it's all because of the work that everybody in these rooms do and the commitment that we have to being a very credible and trustworthy organization. Kind of for me to close, the results or the proof's in the pudding, I guess, so to speak. Last year, after 3 years of legislative general sessions, of discussions of how we were going to fund transportation, and they were all very positive, they just couldn't quite agree on whose plan was the best. Last year, they finally adopted this. And it's pretty historical because it does a couple things. One, it reforms the gas tax. It gives us a chance to keep up with inflation. We're not going to lose ground like we did with traditional gas taxes anymore. But the bigger thing, and some of you may have heard Carlos say this is really important. It gives us a sustainable future with all of our pavements and bridges. It gives us an opportunity to go proactive with all of our pavements and bridges rather than separating out high volume and low volume and treating those children differently. So I think that's my argument for a good focus on preservation, a good focus on asset management, a commitment to those programs. It's not all necessarily in project selection. There's a lot bigger picture that's involved and probably a lot more important that way as well. So with that, I'm going to let Rick get into some of the details of what this means to him as a region director, and he'll blow you guys' socks off.
Okay, thanks, Corey. I was going to spend just a little bit of time, and I think most people in here know where we get this data and how we analyze it, and maybe some of you don't. How many of you heard of the Manley data collection process? Is that what we're calling it, Stan? So every 2 years, we have a very sophisticated van that goes out and takes a lot of data on our roadways, travels every road across the state, and gathers a ton of data. And one of the key things that we've always talked about is if we're going to get the data, we need the data to provide an opportunity for us to make a decision off of. We just don't want to gather data to have data. So I got to give credit to Stan, Gary, and Austin. All three of them are in the room right now, and these guys are the link behind this whole thing of gathering the data, putting it in the system, and providing opportunity for us to make good decisions off that data at the region level. And these guys are really, truly behind the scenes. I'm kind of surprised because they live and breathe this stuff every day, Gary and Austin. So thank you for all the graphs and all the work that you guys do to provide Corey and the rest of us an opportunity to make a good decision off of it. And at the regional level, we can make good decisions off that data as well and understand where our current asset is at and try to project what that asset will be, all in an effort to do the right project at the right time. So with that, I guess the question is what is an asset? You know, I think you got to look at the definition. What is an asset? And at the department, we've spent the last year or so going through what assets do we kind of have, and are all assets created equally? So we spent quite a bit of time with an asset management steering committee looking at the $35 billion of assets that we have out there. That's the number when we add up what pavement asset is, bridge, ATMS signals, pipe, culverts, walls, barrier signs, pavement markings, rumble strips, ADA, and the list goes on and on. But you got to kind of first understand what assets you have in your system, and do you want to collect data on all those assets? How do you want to manage those assets? So what we did was we had a asset management steering committee look at each asset that we have out there and the risk associated with that asset. And this isn't finalized right now yet. I mean, we're still working through this. Hopefully by the first of the year, we'll kind of have this whole discussion finalized. But we're setting them up kind of into tiers, where we've got a tier 1 asset group, a tier 2 asset group, and a tier 3 asset group. A tier 1 asset group, we are going to definitely proactively maintain that asset. We want to know what the data is on it. We want to know what condition it is, take high data analysis, and really manage that asset to get the biggest bang for the buck. And certainly pavement bridges are in those asset categories of 1. We've put ATMS signals in that category, and you'll see pipe culverts having an asterisk bias because we're still uncertain whether we want to have all the data collection on every culvert in the system, or should we manage it a little bit differently and not have all the data but rely on our local resources to understand the risk associated with certain culverts on certain roads, and have the local sheds doing that kind of review of maintenance activities for pipe culverts. And then we got, walls, barrier signs, all those things that are kind of tier 2, and then I'll show you a tier 3 in a second. But it's all based off of kind of risk assessment. And you'll see in the top right there, actually maybe the next slide kind of shows it. Here's our tier 3 assets that we're talking about: cattle guards, lighting, fences, rest areas. Mainly a reactive approach to those assets. Or a historical average of how much money we spend on those assets, and we continue to look at those, but not necessarily have all the data on the condition of those assets, because the data can get overwhelming and expensive. But it's all based on probability and consequences. The risk matrix that we show right there, and we had this group kind of go through it and try to establish what is the probability that this asset could fail in the department, and what are the consequences if that did actually occur. And based on that, set the tier for the different asset categories we have. Now, Nathan talked a little bit about, in a slide earlier, for this past several years, we've been spending 100% of our, well, not 100%, all $30 million less in our $300+ million of federal aid to go to pavement and bridges. And really not a whole lot other than that. And that has certainly put a strain on some of these maintenance folks that I see in here that, you know, we're trying to take care of all these other assets that are out there. And we have been focused the last several years of pavement and bridges. Let's take care of that asset. They are the two most expensive assets we have. But all of our money was going to assets. Now we're trying to balance that out and say, all right, if we can get a condition on those assets and make sure that we can project into the future that we maintain the level of rideability or cracking or whatever we decide to measure on those, that we can continue that asset in that good condition. If there's additional money left over, that money can be utilized at the region to take care of other assets, these tier 2 and tier 3 assets. So that's a challenge for us at the region, and this is just, we developed this past April at the Transportation Commission meeting and talked to the Transportation Commission about this, of allowing some flexibility at the regions to take care of some of these other assets. Now, not to say that we don't have Code 1 money, we still have what we call Code 1 money in the department, which is maintenance money, to take care of a lot of these assets. But when these assets start overburdening that opportunity for maintenance to take care of it, we have an opportunity now to use federal aid or project funds to actually take care of some of these other assets. So the challenge for us is we've kind of given out there right now a challenge for every region to take care of a certain number of surface areas on our level 1 and level 2 network. A surface area is a 12-foot wide, mile-long length of road. And so a certain 2-lane road may have, you know, with a 4-foot shoulder, whatever, you add in the shoulders and everything else, and for a mile of road, you may have 2.5 surface areas or whatever that shoulder width is for that. So we're looking at the surface areas of our system and saying if we can meet a certain surface area threshold and the region can demonstrate that we're keeping our major asset up to date, then any money left over that we have in bid efficiencies or program efficiencies at all, we can start looking to deal with these other hot spots that we have across the state, whether it's culvert or a cattle guard or ATMS stuff, whatever it is. So the challenge for the regions right now is, one, is our current program keeping that surface area number at the level to make sure that we're keeping our highest assets in the best condition that we can? And then if it is, how do you prioritize the next set of projects? So in Region 4, and I know Terry Newell in Region 3, and I'm not sure if Nathan has started it yet using Decision Lens for this in Region 2. Chris, have you started it? So right now, there's another session in here that John Thomas is doing. The department has picked up a tool called Decision Lens, and it allows each region or any group to look at how to prioritize what are those next set of projects that you would do if you've met your surface areas for your roadways. So Region 4 has just went through this in the last month and a half or so. And we're calling it our asset management program, and if we have money available, what's our next set of projects? But Decision Lens is we don't certainly have time to talk a lot about it in here, but there's a couple sessions here at the conference that show you the power of Decision Lens. But it mainly takes the institutional knowledge in the region with your folks, and if you set up a prioritization process of what's important to you in your area, you can take that institutional knowledge and formulate it using a lot of mathematical equations that are in Decision Lens that are way over my head and help you prioritize whether those next set of projects are. And so we're using that right now, and I know Terry is and Chris is, and Nate sounds like you might be. So we're using that, and as we have money available from some of our pavement projects, we're looking to try to fund the next set of projects based on what we feel is important in the region. So that's kind of where we're at, and Carl said it well yesterday in the general session that the level 2 roadway network is going to be removed. I mean, right now we've set up those categories back in 2008 or so, where we had to set up those categories with a new gas tax that is coming on. We'll be able to remove those categories sometime into the future and be able to maintain the system at the level that every road should be treated at. And for Region 4, that's a huge thing because we have 67% of the level 2 roads are in Region 4. I mean, but it's where everybody likes to recreate too. So, you know, we've certainly had some roads that are in very poor condition over the last several years, and been spending quite a bit of our maintenance money just trying to hold them together, being very, very reactive with those level 2 roads. I mean, filling a pothole, crack sealing, and that's about it. And maybe chipping it once every 10 years is at best is what we were able to do on those roadway networks. But with this funding source, we're able to go out on these roads and fix some fix some problems, and get back into more of a proactive approach for these level 2 roads. So with that, it's you know, around 55 million, and I think Carl said it, 40 of it will go to pavement, 15 of it will go to bridges. So certainly you'll see more projects coming out across the state dealing with this new category. But at the end of the day, you know, this is kind of our goal, is building strategies that leave the future generations with an investment that is efficient and self-sustaining. That's kind of our goal, and you know, with the lowest life cycle cost for all those physical assets. That's kind of where we want to be. So with that, we'd like to take some questions for Corey and Nathan. And anybody have anything? I'll moderate this part. Stan.
Our bridges and pavement are recognized to be in very good shape, or going to be in very good shape, because they have this funding stream. But what about ATMS, signals, culverts, and our second tier of assets?
Did you set him up for that question?
I set you up for that question.
Yeah. A very good point. That's part of the discussion. We've got a group right now all set up trying to figure out how to do that and be proactive with those. I mean, the ATMS and the signal are becoming more and more important when you hear about the automated vehicle and all those things that are coming with technology. These systems are becoming more and more important. So Robert Clayton is out of the TOC is doing a ton of work with this, trying to figure out how to be proactive with all of the ATMS, ITS components in the state. Making sure we have a plan to keep that technology up to speed, because it affects this this strategic goal, but it also probably more affects the optimized mobility strategic goal for us. So Nathan, you want to add anything on that?
Well, maybe. One of the items about the ATMS and signal, if you look at that, that's been a huge issue for like the region I'm at. We have half the state's system within the region that I'm in nearly. And what we noticed, I showed you a chart earlier about bridges and how there were different decades when there were lots and lots of bridges that existed, but other decades where there's less. Our signal and ATMS system is similar to that configuration. As opportunities came on, we invested in some of those opportunities, and so we have large portions of our systems that are aging, and we have to figure out what to do with that. Some of those things are like LED optics and that are in signal heads. They'll last a lot longer, and looking for those options, but others are every time a signal lamp goes out, it's got to be replaced. So do you have a budget in place to address how you're going to fund that particular component in a moment's notice? Because how many of you have ever been out here on one of these 5-lane roads when the signal went out? It's a nightmare. And the best answer we have for that right now is we have generators that we can run out in trucks to get to those signals, to plug them in, to run them again, assuming that it's just power failure or something. It's not actually something wrong with the device itself. And the challenge for that is when you're talking about mobility, if you've got 1,000 people all jammed up at the intersection, good luck getting your generator even into the intersection. Really huge challenges as we look forward, and that's one of the reasons that asset needs to be managed.
So just really quick, Stan, I appreciate the question. Ever since I can remember, we've had a focus on pavements and bridges. And the reason we've done that is was mentioned before, that's about $30 billion of the $35 billion asset. That's a pretty good percentage, 85+% that we were really, really focused on. But quite frankly, we've had very limited resources to address that other $5 billion. So there's a bunch of assets out there that we haven't had any way to address. Any extra money we got, every year we get what's called August redistribution, and that's our opportunity to go and and take advantage, because we've issued all of our money, we've met our federal obligations, we can go take advantage of collecting a little extra federal money. It's new money. We've always taken that money and put it right back into pavements or bridges. Or we've got good bids on a lot of our projects, and so we put that right back into pavements and bridges. And what Rick was talking about is we've probably been overdoing some of that in some cases. We've probably been putting a little too much money on our interstates in some cases. Maybe they're in too good a condition. But what we're doing now with the philosophy of looking at surface areas and doing just the right amount to maintain a certain condition level is it's going to allow us to take that extra money that we see occasionally, and it's not a lot, but at least have an opportunity now to dedicate a source of funding to those assets that weren't otherwise we were able to deal with them. One thing too, and I was sitting down here thinking, I was very remiss in leaving something out as I was talking about giving a lot of credit to preservation and asset management programs. And you reminded me, Stan, because we've had a lot of these assets, a lot of these level 2 roads that we haven't been able to take care of, somehow we have. Somehow we've done a pretty dang good job. And I gotta give a lot of credit to the guys out in the region, especially our maintenance, our TransTech guys, our maintenance crews, our construction crews, for their dedication. Because you guys, I mean, without that, you don't find ways to make that last nickel stretch and keep that road passable. So, you know, that's another portion of the preservation that we owe an awful lot of gratitude and thanks to, is the folks that are doing it with a few nickels here and there, and we couldn't do it without that. Steve? Okay, I'll moderate.
Still taking questions?
Sure, absolutely. Rick, you want to answer this?
So, are there any discussions about changing for the Orange Book and Purple Book, the percentages that can be spent on other assets while we're out there on the road?
No. Next question? No. So it's kind of, we've had what we call an Orange Book or a preservation program, a Purple Book or a minor rehab program, and we set some very stringent guidelines on what we can spend that money on. And the intent was to make sure that we funneled as much money as we possibly could into those pavements. That was the expensive asset that was out there. That was the one that we were really having a lot of trouble with years ago. And so the intent was to make sure we didn't spend money on anything else. What Rick described in terms of, in the last piece, he was trying to figure out how to prioritize those assets that aren't funded. One of the mechanisms is that if you have some additional savings on projects, or if we have, say, some of that August redistribution from the federal program, that we could indeed put some of that on some of those preservation projects or minor rehab projects. There's still a process, and it's fairly straightforward, but yes, we recognized that we've probably been a little too rigid in that. And you know, now that we've come to a place with the majority of our system, our bridges and our pavements, to where we feel really good about the condition levels we're meeting, now we need to open that up a lot.
You might say it's a myth that you can't spend money on anything else, Steve, when you look at that item. But it's amazing how, as organizations, we put rules and guidelines in place to address different things, and then it appears that there's no way around that particular rule, or there's no other option that's out there. That definitely exists in your question. Perhaps what's important for us, though, is for you to put this in context of your own finances. Most of you probably have a mortgage. What happens if you don't pay the mortgage? How long can you wait to pay the mortgage? And do you base that versus maybe the vacation you want to go on? Do you use the mortgage money to go on that vacation? The plan that we've outlined with the asset management and moving into those strategic metrics are that if you can pay the mortgage and you have leftover funds, or you're able to lower the interest rate or something like that that gives you a new revenue stream, then you can take that money and apply it to those other assets in a different way. Now, sometimes you want to do that on a little small project, which is really to the point of your question. You're like, so can I just add a little bit in this project, or do that here while I'm here and while I'm going, not have to do it on the back end? We believe you can do that, and that's one of the reasons that we came up with the surface area plan that we talked slightly about that shows like a certain threshold is met and it achieves our level. But if you want to do it on a little project, you need to know that more than just at a snapshot in time. So we've been looking at over a 10-year trend. And over a 10-year trend, you have it. We've been building what our deputy director called his 3-year plan for everything. And as you get those 3-year plans in place and identify those items that are out there, you look at the trend, you show how you're going to meet the needs that are there, and then you identify in those plans those items that need addressed, and it should give us more flexibility within projects. Right now, that's done and it's governed at a commission level. In other words, as we come up with our best solutions and choices, we want to bring that to our financial advisor and get their buy-off that we have sound judgment in what we're doing. But we certainly have created a method for that to happen that maybe didn't exist in the past. So, any other questions? Yeah.
I'm just wondering, so there's a standard practice to replace bridges every 50 years. Well, the bridge is always in 50 years to put it on the replacement list. But I was wondering, there are a couple bridges on that chart that were built in 1910 and they're in good condition. So why are we replacing bridges that are in good condition? You know, just because something's over 50 doesn't mean that we should replace it.
That's a good question, and I've seen one of those bridges. It exists in Rockville. It's a nice old metal structure. The bridge looks fantastic, and not only is it in good condition, but it has character, right? But as you ask that question about why would we do that, our plan is not to just replace them because they've hit 50 years. And as we showed the resource that's there, the thinking if it's just age-based, we defined that if you can identify the condition and the risk associated with the structure, then you can decide whether or not you have to replace it. And we have an old bridge in Rockville. It was a metal structure bridge that worked in a little community and gave them access in and out as second access to the community. And the structure is old, and it got on that list, well, has to be replaced. As we were able to perform some analysis on the bridge and look at different options available for the bridge, though, they were going to shut it down immediately because it wouldn't meet a load rating that was safe for vehicles to go over, and end it, but they wanted some of the different characteristics to exist. And as they looked at that, we found we have a lot more what we'd call inforensic testing that can be done, or methods to look at the asset and decide what's available to it. And when we invested, I don't know, what did we spend, Rick, $30,000, $40,000 of investment into gathering some of that data and maybe looking at how those different items work, we found out we had a lot of choices for that bridge besides just replacement, and choices that could last 5 or 10 years, 20 years, maybe at the maximum, but there was a limit to what you could do in some of those things. And that gave opportunity for us to look at the asset and work it a little differently. But the bridge had to do something because you couldn't even get a garbage truck across it to go pick up the load without fear of having damage added at the time that it was inspected. So our plan for asset management is you define those levels, we continue to build these different tools that do the inspections and do the analysis on those features. And as you do that, you actually end up with more options that allow your money to go further. Because now that investment in that bridge that's gonna maybe cost a few million to replace can be spread out over a plan for 10 years. Any other thoughts? Rick?
I just want to add on the bridges, that sheet that we showed you on the bridges, that's all local and UDOT bridges. That's just not UDOT only bridges. So, the context of some of these bridges in some of these small communities are different than our freeway type bridges. I mean, and a different level of service can be dealt with. There's several bridges on the local system that may be really old, but it's just load limiting them down, and then you get another 15 or 20 years of life out of those things before you have to spend the $3 or $4 million. So it's kind of that lowest life cycle cost for that physical asset that we've been talking about. You need to evaluate the situation where it's at and see if we can get more life out of that. I mean, I think we do that with signs and everything else. I mean, if we can get 3 more years out of a sign panel, why not get the 3 years out of the sign panel before you replace it? So you should extend the life as long as you can and end up in that sweet spot of doing the right thing at the right time. Any other questions for Corey?
If not, I'd like to congratulate the three panelists, and I ask the audience also, so thank you very much.
We're done already?
Time for lunch.
If you run, you might be able to overtake the earlier classes.